All right, let's finish up factoring by grouping, part 3. All right, 192, 72, 24, and negative 9. Wow. Okay, so 192, I could do the factor tree for all of these. Let's see, but 192 is 6 2's and a 3. 72 is 3 2's and 2 3's. 24 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And then 9 is 3 times 3. You're still going to need the prime factorization. And it looks like these are going to have at least a 3 in common. So I'm going to put a star by it. That means we will be doing greatest common factor first and then finish it up with factoring by grouping. Now, all of them have a 3 in common. And it looks like they all have an x in common also. So my greatest common factor is 3x. When I factor the 3x out of the first term, it's still going to leave behind all those 2's, which multiply out to be 64. I'm going to have one x left over and y. When I factor the 3 out of 72, it's going to leave behind 24. I factored one of the x's out, which will leave x squared. Minus, when I factor the 3x out of the third term, the 3 is gone, so I have an 8, and then the x will be gone, so I'm still left with an ry. When I factor 3x out of the last term, I'm going to be left with 1 3. One x is gone, but I still have an r and an x. After you finish with the greatest common factor, you're able to block it off and do the 4 terms now as a factoring by grouping. Now, luckily, we've already factored them before. I know that 64 is 6 2's. I know that 24 is 3 2's and a 3. 8 is 3 2's, and we have 3. Now remember, you're still going to need to do the factor trees, and you'll have lots of time. In fact, pause the video if you want to go back and do those. I just looked back up here for 64, and it's everything else that was left, and so forth. Now, I'm going to do the factoring by grouping. 64 and 24 both look like they had 3 2's in common. So they have an 8 in common, and there was also an x. I'm going to factor the 8x out of the first term, which will leave 8y. I'm going to factor 8x out of the second term, which will leave behind a plus 3x. Bring down the sign between the two groups. 8ry and 3rx only have an r in common. I'm going to factor it out. If I factor the negative r out of the first term, I still have 8y. If I factor the negative r out of the second term, I'm still going to be left with plus 3x. Remember, it's not an accident that the parentheses match. They're supposed to. We're now down to 2 terms. Those 2 terms have an 8y plus 3x in common. I'm going to open up the leftover parentheses. When I factor the 8y plus 3x out of the first term, it leaves me with an 8x. When I factor the 8y plus 3x out of the second term, it leaves behind a negative 3. But don't forget that 3x that you took out earlier as a greatest common factor, he is also going to be part of our final answer. And real quick, just to finish up, we only have to do numbers 1 through 16 on the homework. So let's look at our last one. First, the prime factorization. 140, let's see here, is going to be 2 times 2 times 5 times 7. 60 is 2 times 2 times 5 times, okay. I'm doing this on the fly. It is 2 times 5 times, okay, one more time. It is 2 times 3 times 2 times 5. Sorry, out of order. 10 times 6. Okay. 168. Oh my goodness. Okay. 2. Okay. I paused the video. There are the right and correct prime factorizations of those huge numbers. So now, pause the video if you need to write that down. And we're going to go through and find everything that they have in common. I see 2 2s and nothing else. All right. So they have a 4 that I can factor out. When I factor the 4 out of the first term, it's going to leave behind a 35AB. When I factor a 4 out of the second term, it's going to leave behind a minus 15 a squared. When I factor the 4 out of the third term, it's going to leave behind a 42b. And when I factor the 4 out of the last term, it's going to leave behind a negative 18a. And again, pause the video if you want to try it first. Now, that is our greatest common factor. And because it had a greatest common factor, I'm going to put a star out to the side. Now, I'll do my factoring by grouping. I'm going to group the first 2 numbers together and the last 2 pieces together. 35ab and negative 15a squared both have a 5 and an a in common. That is the greatest common factor for the first group. When I factor 5a out of the first term, it's going to leave behind a 7b. When I factor 5a out of the second term, it's going to leave behind a negative 3a. Bring down the sign between the 2 groups. 42b and 18, again, I can bring down the factorizations if I need to, but they're both going to have a 6 in common. When I factor the 6 out of 42b, it's going to leave behind a 7b. When I factor the 6 out of the negative 18a, it's going to leave behind a minus 3a. Again, not an accident that those parentheses factors match. We have 7b minus 3a as my greatest common factor. And what is left when I factor that out of the first term, it is a 5a. What I get when I factor the 7b minus 3 out of the second term is a plus 6. I'm not quite finished. Remember the 4 that we took out at the very beginning? He's our final answer. All right.